Hey, well, hello, world history students. Here we are, lecture on Imperial Rome, in which we look at the transition from the collapse of the Roman Republic to the establishment of the Principate under Caesar Augustus, under which Rome will play out the last 500 years or so of its history as an empire. And what this lecture specifically looks at are four pillars that allowed the Roman Empire to succeed for so long, because it really was, although it was different in many ways, a bit of a tragedy that the Republic fell, that the empire itself, or Imperial Rome, was a success. It lasted for centuries. We Americans we're not even halfway to as long as it lasted. So we want to look at the four pillars that made it so strong. And so you'll notice your handout for this lecture actually has four spots, because unlike the other lectures with 3 points, this one has four. Though you'll see the most space is allotted to the fourth point, because we have the most slides and information on that. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So these four pillars, so the 4 points of this lecture that allowed the Roman Empire to flourish are its law system, its administrative abilities, the strength of its army, and then also the philosophy and religion that undergirded Imperial Rome. There we have a picture of the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, or the divine one. All right, here we go. We'll talk about each of these in order. So first of all, the law, and we'll be doing some readings on this, but one of the reasons that the Roman Empire flourished even under a monarchy was its law system and its attention to, its focus, and the importance of laws. Something that had been sorely lacking in the last century of the Republic, a disregard for law. And so, there were three types of laws that governed the Roman Empire. There was civil law, what was known as the law of nations, and then natural law. And what this just meant was that there was civil law was the same law that was consistent across all Roman citizens. And then they had a law that was the law of nations, and that was a set of laws that were specifically for all the different people groups and nations that came under Roman control. And so there was kind of there was a distinction between the law of if you were a Roman citizen, and then the law that applied to you if you were just an outsider. And then there was even kind of a third circle, and that was natural law. And that, of course, we've talked about. That is like the law according to nature, what is right and wrong, the natural conscience or morality of all human beings. And these three tiers kind of hits at one of the reasons Roman law was so effective, and actually is the foundation of modern Western law today. This is one of the great gifts that the Roman Empire gives to us today, is that they began to see law as universal. That although they did make these distinctions, their goal was to be as consistent as possible from their laws for citizens, laws for conquered peoples and outsiders, what the Greeks would have called barbarians, and then their laws for all human beings. And so they began to even think, even that mindset of law is something that is in nature, law is something that is for all human beings. We want to make those laws, we want to figure out what those are and build our society upon them. They were also popular because they were equally applicable. Again, whether you were an outsider or whether you were a citizen, they didn't have different laws based on your social class or different laws based on your rank. If you were a Roman citizen, you had definite rights under Roman law that could be applied anywhere in the empire. Think of Paul appealing to Caesar when he's captured by the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts. They were practical. They focused on not on like what you believed or your faith so much, or even kind of obscure things. They focused on how to help, basically what law is supposed to do, or how we view it today, because we're the products of this. What causes people to get along? What is a fair punishment? What is a fair consequence to get people to get along and function? The Romans were very much into administration. They wanted everything just to go smoothly. And so they focused their laws on that. And so they built a remarkably stable society. As I've already said, another reason the laws were still in practice today and remained consistent for a long time was they tried to build them upon natural law, conscience. If a political law agrees with what people feel in their heart or in their mind rationally, is right or justified or is just, then they're more likely to obey it. And so their goal was to build their law upon as close as possible to this idea of natural law, meaning most people tended to agree, hey, these are good laws that we can abide by. They didn't seem arbitrary or out of place. And we're going to be talking about this thing called the Corpus Iuris Civilis, which is this compendium of laws compiled across the Empire of Rome by an Emperor Justinian. And this is just important because it kind of takes centuries and centuries of law, and he codifies them within a single corpus of works in which, and that has been preserved, and throughout medieval Europe and on into the modern age, that kind of formed the foundation. That book, it's kind of like the Bible for lawyers in Western civilization, as an accumulation of all these laws that Rome had accumulated up to the time of Justinian's reign. And it kind of provided, again, the foundation for the law codes of many Western and European nations. And we'll be reading excerpts of that in class. Okay, the second pillar, administration. As I said, kind of goes hand in hand with law a bit, is that the Romans were administrators. They were good organizers. They knew how to get things done efficiently, and were always looking for a way to adapt and do things better. The way they administrated their empire was very efficient. They used local governors. They allowed them to maintain local customs. They allowed them to maintain local religions. They didn't seek to, impose a certain ideology upon anybody in their empire. They just basically said, you follow the laws and obey, and you can kind of run your own show. They had an organized bureaucracy. So in other words, you had the emperor, but he had a lot of officials and a lot of experts running different departments. A bureaucracy means many drawers, like a bureau, which is just a dresser. And he had different departments focused on different tasks and efficiencies in different tasks that the empire required to run smoothly. They made sure that this bureaucracy in the government was merit-based. They were very good at promoting outsiders. Anybody who has the skills and the abilities and the aptitude, those were the ones that got promoted. So things were run well because it wasn't, who you knew or who you related to so much, most of the time at least. It was, what is your merit? You'll see a lot of the Roman emperors adopted sons. And that is kind of this interesting thing, because they sought to pass down influence through their families. But when they saw somebody and that they said that person has ability, that person has merit, they wanted to put them in that position of power. And so they would adopt them into their family to pass it along. So while it was still, giving opportunities to family, that was actually coming second to recognizing, hey, this is a capable person. Let's give them some power and responsibility. And as we've talked about the Roman roads, but their infrastructure, from roads to aqueducts to, again, the basic functions of to help a city and a town or a region function, they were very good at making sure those things were in place. Travel during the Roman Empire was inexpensive. It was relatively quick compared to other places and times in human history. It was relatively safe. We'll talk about the military next. But so in other words, their empire could function commercially. And when people can run their businesses and they can meet their needs and they can make money, you're going to have that's going to all make for a stable society. So the infrastructure, the organization, things ran smoothly. Today it would mean, there's milk in the at the grocery store, and there's bread, and there's gasoline at the gas stations, and so people are pretty content, whether it's an emperor in charge, but because, again, their daily lives are being run well. And that was something that the Roman Empire was very skilled at. Again, we've kind of looked at this map, but there's the network. There's the stability, this ability for the empire to communicate and move with not just the armies, though that's important, but also trade and communication. You could send messages. They didn't have Wi-Fi, but these roads meant you could get messages, couriers to different parts of the empire very quickly in order to respond and deal with issues as they arose. It was connected. The third pillar, we spent a whole lecture class or so on this one, but it was just the military. The military, the Principate, the emperors restored it to its strength. It was used to maintain stability and order throughout the empire, especially on the borders, but even sometimes internally. It was a very attractive opportunity for people, whether they were Roman citizens or they were outsiders, because it allowed for social mobility. You could go into the Roman army, and again, it was a long commitment of decades. But when you came out of it, you could raise the status of your family. You'd have a pension, you'd have land, you'd have citizenship if you weren't already a citizen. And as we said, that meant a lot of benefits and status within the empire. And so, as it says there, again, path to citizenship and acculturation. That second word, acculturation, that means you could take people who didn't know the laws, the customs, and as we'll get to, maybe the religious mindset or the values of Rome. And when they passed through the military, they would gain the culture of Rome. And so as a way of instilling Roman values into the various peoples of the empire. And if you remember, that was one of the weaknesses of the Republic, where they began to fray at the edge because they had more people within their borders who had no buy-in to the core values of the Roman Republic. The Roman military was a way in which to acculturate and to kind of restabilize and kind of get the buy-in and get the same beliefs to everybody within the empire, even as they conquered new peoples and brought them into the empire. So the military, one of the third pillar. And the fourth one we'll spend the most time on, and because we've talked the least about it so far, and that is philosophy. And that is, okay, what in that acculturation process, what were they teaching these people in the military, or what were families or schools teaching? Because really, the heart and soul of a nation or its unity really is its culture. Culture comes first. Culture produces a type of government, and the empires recognize this, and they needed these certain common values to instill in the hearts. We talked about faith leading to belief, or to beliefs, to leading to freedom. And so that's what this section is all about. What were the ideas that held the people of Rome together for so many centuries? And so three key ones were these. There's three key. You can read that chart. It's got a bunch of them, but the three core were this idea of labor, pietas, and fatum. And labor, just labor, that honest toil, hard work. You're going to have to work to earn things. That was core to the Roman mindset. Pietas was kind of we get our word piety, but faith, devotion to one's gods, devotion to one's family, devotion to one's city, kind of like faithfulness, loyalty. And then fatum, where we kind of get our word fate from. And that was just a duty to fate in the Roman order, this idea that your life served the purpose of the greatness of Rome, and that you needed to do your duty. It wasn't about you and necessarily your own dreams and your own selfish or personal desires. It was about how can I tie my fate and my labors and my pietas to the larger Roman order. So the sense of service and duty was core during the successful centuries of the Roman Empire. Feeding into these core ideals, would be two major philosophies. The first one is this called Epicureanism. And this comes from a Greek philosopher, Epicurus. So you can see it come long before the transition to the Roman Empire, but it began to really gain traction during the empire. And its focus was pleasure, a seeking out of pleasure. And what that doesn't mean is, it doesn't mean like kind of pleasures of the flesh. It doesn't mean kind of like just living wildly and crazily and indulging every physical appetite. It meant the pleasure of peace. It meant the pleasure of being calm. It meant a freedom from pain. It kind of meant, how do you avoid painful things? And the Epicureans' answer to that was a moderate, simple life. So the way in which you live the most pleasure-filled life, which again, don't think of wild clubs and parties and people, drugs and alcohol and physical, sensuality and all that. No, they said, no, that's actually going to cause you a lot of pain in your life, which is true. They're saying, no, moderation, a moderate, simple life will bring you the most tranquility and the most pleasure. They said you need to avoid the stresses of the physical world. You need to seek pleasure. They said the number one source of pleasure in life was friendship. There goes that emphasis on loyalty. And they rejected the spiritual life. Okay, they were pretty much close to atheists. In other words, don't worry about the gods. Don't worry about eternity. Don't worry about what comes after life. Don't worry about death. That's just going to cause you pain. Focus on the here and now. Seize the day, and and enjoy it for its simple pleasures. And they also said, stay out of politics. Politics were another source of pain and frustration and vexation, that they said, just stay out of that. It's going to bring you too much pain, not enough tranquility. And they were, in a way, you will see, opposed to the other philosophy that we're going to point at. Not talk so much about Platonism, but this thing called Stoicism. But so again, Epicureanism was one of these major philosophies in the empire that focused on avoiding pain through a moderate, simple life, focused on friendship and the kind of the simple joys of a balanced, moderate life. Not too much, avoiding excess. Not too much, not too little. Stoicism was the other major, and I'd say maybe more majority philosophy. It was also from the 3rd century BC by a founder named Zeno, and its goals were virtue. Basically, it wanted to instill strong morals and virtues within its believers. And it was this whole idea that human beings, like the natural law, could use their reason, like you would investigate the world to figure out something scientifically or physically or mathematically or historically. You could use your reason to figure out what is right and wrong. And Stoics were devoted to figuring out what was right and what was wrong. And they also sought in doing that to discipline their emotions, so that you wouldn't let how you feel overcome your mental, rational ability. There's reason to say, here's the right way to react. Here's what's going to be the best course of action. Here's right versus here's what's wrong. And this was actually very popular during Republican Rome. Cicero, who you guys watched the video on, was probably one of the most famous proponents of Stoicism, though we'll also talk about Marcus Aurelius. And it was also favored within the military, as we'll kind of see why in a minute. And that actually, there's a statue of Marcus Aurelius. And we may be reading some of his Stoic teachings later this week. But what Stoicism did is it because you focused on right and wrong and kind of doing your duty, it allowed you to accept any misfortune or sacrifice. Stoics were renowned for their ability to say, you know what, I might not like this. This might be difficult. This might cause me pain. So it's kind of opposite of Epicureanism there. But I'm going to do my duty. I'm going to do what's right according to my rational natural law, understanding of natural law. And so I'm willing to accept suffering. I'm willing to accept pain. I'm willing to accept even death. And you can see why that would be popular among the military, and also how it would make for a strong society, because it really emphasized that unity and that duty. It argued that moral and intellectual wisdom were the same, so that you weren't, oh, I'm really book smart. They would say, well, that's no good. How are you morally smart? Do you know how to make good, virtuous decisions? Really emphasized character. That somebody who's really wise would have really good character, according to the Stoics. And at times they could be kind of seen as pessimists, because they kind of had this ideal of right and wrong. This is how we're supposed to behave. This is how I should act. I should be able to control my emotions. And when they kind of saw people in their society who would fall short of those ideals, or even themselves fall short of those ideals, there was kind of a frustration. Like, why can't we be as good as we should be? We need to train harder. We need to discipline ourselves more. We need to study more. And so there was kind of a frustration, because to them, to a Stoic, there's a very clear gap between the ideal and oftentimes how they or other people behaved. High standards. And the real kind of fascinating point that I want to take with the Stoics is that they're the ones, they can't really embrace this idea of the logos, or the logos. They believe that all life was ordered and planned according to a higher power. They didn't necessarily want to call that God. Some of them did call it God, but that there was a higher fatum, a fate, a fortune, a direction to history. And that was the whole point of a Stoic, to say, I want to follow the purpose of history. I want to follow the destiny of my life. And I want to know, and that's what they saw virtue as being the way to do that, to make sure that they fulfilled their destiny or their fate. And the logos was the embodiment of that. The logos was the highest ideal. It was the ultimate rationality, the ultimate source of natural law in the universe. And so they had this idea that all order, all cosmic order, you can see why they were into administration and law, because they believed there was this set order to the universe, including morality. And they called that the culmination of that, the apex of that, the logos or the logos, that the perfect ideal, what Plato would have called the actually, it's escaping me, but the kind of the highest reality is the logos, and that's to which all Stoics were trying to achieve. They believed that this logos was at the beginning of the world, and they had prophecies that this logos is what would return at the end of the world, and that they could try to bring about and try to bring perfection to the world. Hopefully that starts to sound kind of interesting to you, that it was this beginning and this end, that the whole purpose of history was to bring about a return to the ultimate logos. They even prophesy of a go-between, that the logos was going to come down as a human being, born of a woman. They actually said it would be born of a virgin in one of the Stoic prophecies. It would be born of a virgin, and it would be a go-between God and man, and that it would help mankind achieve this ultimate virtue. You can see why I'm getting excited. They kind of had this Gentile, pagan, Stoic approach or perspective on Jesus, the Word. And that's why I'm not going to read this here, but we've talked about John 1, verses 1 through 5, where it talks about Jesus as the Logos, or as the Logos. And why did John say Jesus was the Word? Well, because he's talking through this Stoic philosophy, that this thing that you Stoics are looking for, this ultimate virtue, this cosmic order, this beginning and this end. Again, read those verses. This is Jesus. He's trying to say that thing you're looking for, pagans, who you are not Jews, you've never read the Torah, you don't know, but the thing that you, with your sincerity in investigating the natural world, are trying to find, his name is Jesus. And this is just really key for two reasons. One, it's an example of how people who sincerely seek God, as God says in Scripture, they find him. Just like we talked about Socrates and we talked about Plato coming very, very near to a Hebrew or biblical view of God, so too we have the Stoics. So not only can people find God if they are sincerely seeking truth, But we also have the fact that there's going to be this whole segment of the Roman Empire and their population who now have this mindset and have this foundation that when they hear the gospel preached by Paul and the other apostles, they can relate to it. When they can say, hey, the Logos, when they read the scripture in John 1, all of a sudden they have a foundation to go, oh yeah, I know what that could be. That could be this thing I've been searching for all my life. It's the Logos, it's Jesus. And so you can see God using Stoicism, I believe, to prepare the hearts of the Roman Empire for the coming of Jesus. And we're going to be talking about the rise of Christianity. But one of the reasons I believe it's so successful is you have this Stoic mindset already established within the Roman population. Good stuff. And then the last major element of Greek religion or philosophy was this thing called the cult of the emperor. And that was that basically a divine worship of these emperors. It started in traditional or Republican Rome. You had this worship of the manes, or which were family gods. Every family had their own personal gods, and they were personal to you, and you would worship them. Your family would worship them, and it was a way of unifying your household. And again, somebody who had great pietas was very devoted to their family gods. As the Greek pantheon got brought into the Roman religion, now all of a sudden we have more and more gods that we need to pray to. And this kind of devotion to a family god, not now just your household, but now the Roman family, the empire family gods, is Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, steps into that breach. And he'd say, just as you had this family god of your house you would pray to, this manes, now the emperor is now the family god of the entire empire. And so when you want your family of Romans to be blessed, you're going to look to me as your God. And that's where we get Caesar Augustus, Caesar being the adopted name of his uncle Julius Caesar, but then Augustus meaning divine one. He takes on the title of a divine one. He also takes on the title of Divi Filius. That's a gold coin with Caesar Augustus's, or Octavian was his other name, his head on there. And he said Divi Filius, the son of God. Divi Filius, the son, divine son. And so we have here, this is important for a couple of reasons. One, we have the return of the God Kings, that as the Principate seeks to establish its order, it brings in that divinity saying, hey, I'm not just a man. These are not just human laws. I am the Son of God. I am the divine one. And to betray me would be to betray the entire Roman Empire. So again, we see this tendency again and again throughout human societies. The other reason this is going to be a big deal is because now, where the Romans had traditionally left a lot of freedom to worship, this is going to be an issue for anybody who's not a pantheist. Because a pantheist or a polytheist, okay, I'll worship this god, that god, that god, and yeah, throw in Augustus, throw in the emperor. I don't have a problem worshiping multiple gods. But for monotheists like the Jews and the Christians, this is going to be a big deal because they cannot worship anybody but Yahweh, anybody but Jesus Christ, or his Father. And so you're going to see a persecution break out during the Roman Empire against Jews and Christians in particular, because they are now seen as being traitorous to the nation. If they won't worship the emperor, then they are a political danger and a source of instability for the nation. So that's going to be a problem. This is an important statue here where we have just to show, you have Zeus there portrayed as the ultimate king of gods for the Greek pantheon. And then here is Caesar Augustus, Octavian, being posed in an almost identical pose, claiming to be Divi Filius, the son of God. Where again, now he's not just king, he's not just emperor, but he is divine, adding layer upon layer of his authority. And so big ideas: know your four pillars: law, administration, army, and stoicism. The return of the God Kings, they're back. Whenever mankind rules on their own, they have to claim divine unction. And this powerful connection between the Stoics, that the Stoics saw Jesus coming, that they are an example of a pagan truth seekers, almost like the wise men from the East, who without the help of the Bible or being Jewish in their beliefs, still had sincerely sought the truth, and God had prepared their hearts and their ideas for the coming of Jesus. And this is going to be fertile ground for the spread of Christianity. All right, we will be talking about this in class. Have a great day.